Balance Council on 5.0.14. Greetings from the StarCraft 2 Balance Council. After around 7 months since the last patch, we are happy to present the next major multiplayer balance update, featuring changes for 14 units and 10 buildings, as well as 2 new abilities. We feel that the previous patch has mostly achieved its goals, fixing community pain points around Widowmines and Cyclone, and slightly helping Protoss players in early and mid-game against Terrans. However, the current patch has a couple more ambitious goals outlined below. The first goal is to nerf defensive and camping playstyles for all races. Great. Both related to early and late game on the higher levels of play. We will target specific units, buildings, and abilities suited for camping to promote more active gameplay across all stages of the game. I personally don't like camping gameplay at all. I think the passivity is very boring to watch. It's fun when it happens every once in a while, but when most games are all about surviving until minute 30, it's a little lame. Main problem for this, though, is not so much like defensive and camping playstyles. It's very much so the fact that one race tends to have like the better maxed out army. Like one race can do a better job having like a death ball. So if you can sit back and just get to that death ball, usually there's always going to be one that will be slightly stronger than the others. Usually you can at that point win. So I'm not sure how we're going to achieve this, but we'll see. They're looking at Maru specifically, I guess. The second goal is to continue reshaping Protoss tools for high-level gameplay. We believe there is still a major gap between how Protoss races play and... we believe there's still a major gap between how Protoss race plays and feels on the highest level of play and the levels below. Okay, right. So at the highest level, there's a little bit of an interesting situation, right? So current set of changes aims to make Protoss slightly more efficient with the strongest and smartest execution, while helping Terran and Zerg players against Protoss on the lower levels, right? So if you look at Grandmaster League, Master League, and the ranks below, there is a very high amount of Protoss players. Grandmaster League at some point was like 3/4 Protoss, which is kind of ridiculous, because Protoss is not really winning tournaments at the absolute highest level. There are a couple players out there that do extremely well. I have been specifically incredibly impressed by MaxSpecs, but MaxSpecs does not play offline tournaments, and I feel like that alone already sways the statistics quite a bit, but I guess we'll see what the changes are. So the third goal would be to provide strong playstyle alternatives for various matchups. Zergs, why are they constantly pluralizing? The Zergs, Terrans, Protoss? Anyway, Zerg might be now better equipped to use ground-based armies against mass air strategies. Okay. So right now, most of the strategies are all about mass corruptor. And some of the Terran mech units are now more efficient in harassment or certain straight-up fight scenarios. Okay. It's a little bit of a interesting writing here. Anyways, lastly, we would like to continue adding overall gameplay and quality of life improvements viable across all levels of play. So just to clarify, I don't know anything about what happens in the Community Balance Council. I'm not part of this. As far as I'm aware, most people don't really want to be part of this so much, because it's a lot of arguing and a lot of people disagreeing across the board. Like, imagine if you have a group of people that are trying to do the best for their own race. Even if you try to be subjective, you're still very likely to have very strong opinions. Okay, so I have not seen any of these changes, so I'm very excited, actually. This just randomly popped up. The Nexus. Shield battery overcharge ability removed. New ability added, energy overcharge. Energy overcharge costs 50 energy and recharges 100 energy of the targeted ally unit or structure with a maximum range of 8. Targeted ally unit or structure. So you can have one High Templar, Storm, recharge, Storm, recharge, Storm, I guess you could have a shield battery and give those additional energy? Interesting. Main problem with shield battery overcharge, in my point of view anyways, is that it's like sometimes a get out of jail for free card, where you just kind of play it and you can't be attacked for a little while. It's fine. It's not nearly as bad as like the shooting pylons and the shooting Nexi that we've had in the past. I guess you can use this as well for sentry spam. You can do a lot of force fielding, but this is also very APM intensive. So while being one of the most important tools in Protoss defense, Shield Battery Overcharge is also one of the most frustrating abilities to play against, right? It's overall more efficient at the lower level of play, unlike other defensive techniques like Transfuse or Mass Repair. Instead of this ability, there's a new tool which can help empower Protoss support units like the Sentry, Oracle, or High Templar during defense. I guess you can do a lot of stasis wards as well. The ability can still be used to restore shield battery energy, but it is expected to perform much better, or much weaker rather, in this scenario than shield battery overcharge. Right. So my first gut instinct with this is that this is going to make Protoss early game defense and mid game defense substantially harder. I'm sure there's going to be something to compensate. Shield battery. Shield battery. The HP and the shields have been increased by 50 HP each. Considering this ability swap might be a direct Protoss nerf in a lot of early and mid game scenarios, shield batteries will now have increased survivability to slightly compensate for that, and the PTR games will be closely monitored to see if any additional buffs are required in this area. Okay. I don't know if that's going to be enough, if I'm being honest with you. Because shield battery overcharge really is powerful, but it also kind of depends on how this works. Like, can I set this up to be a auto cast? Or do I have to click the Nexus, click Energy Overcharge, click the High Templar, then Storm again? Then go back to the Nexus, click the Energy Overcharge, click the Templar, then Storm with the Templar? Do I have to go back and forth 17 times? We would have to test this out, but overall I like the idea. It's especially a little lame when you have like a late game medevac drop, or say like a late game Zergling run by, and Protoss doesn't really have a lot of defenses except like 4 photon cannons and like a battery. And you can just kind of shield battery overcharge and buy yourself like an extra like 10 seconds of time or so. A little bit boring, but this is quite an ambitious play. So my main concern, right, whenever I read these kind of changes, I like it in context. I like in concept. I think the idea is pretty good, but this is something that needs to be actively monitored. And if we have seen the speed of updates over the last couple of years, sometimes it can take months for anything to happen. So, ambitious changes, I like them. I am not against them at all. But I'm always a little bit worried that if things are not changing fast enough, and if things are a little bit messy, maybe it could work out in the opposite direction, and things could be worse. But anyways, Colossus, shield and HP changed from 150-200 to 100-250. Okay, so more HP, less shields? With no battery overcharge, having more shields is no longer crucial for key Protoss units like the Colossus. Instead of having more HP, it will be helpful against EMP in the Protoss versus Terran matchup, and will also be more rewarding for armor upgrade investments. Yes. So this doesn't change much, but it does make the unit slightly better in the mid game. This is a direct nerf to EMP. Right now, a lot of Protoss players, they transition away from Colossi in a later stage of the game. They're kind of popular early on, but EMP kind of nullifies a lot of those units, right? Like Archons can be messed up pretty badly, even Zealots can be messed up pretty badly, High Templar. All of it can kind of be a mess. So a lot of Protoss players almost feel forced to go into Disruptors. This will make the Colossus basically 50 HP more powerful against Ghost-based armies. So it goes from 150 shields to 100 shields, 200 HP to 250 HP. Okay, that sounds good. That sounds like a good chance. Yeah, like a good choice. Tempest, supply cost decreased from 5 to 4. Damage point decreased. Okay. And attack range versus air decreased too. So the Tempest is one of the most awkward units in StarCraft 2. It's really, really tricky to control properly. The idea here is to make it much better at microing. right? You're gonna have a much easier time controlling it. So Tempests are a very important late game tool for Protoss, but their high supply cost combined with an average amount of damage, right, makes the ultimate Protoss army weaker in a head-to-head fight. This set of changes will help high-level Protoss players to fit a bit more power in their mech's armies and have more opportunities for micro while slightly decreasing the unit's maximum attack range to not strengthen mass Tempest armies. Damage point is a little bit of a confusing thing, but in the past we've seen adjustments with the Viking damage point, for example. That's, I think, the most recent version that we've seen, and it essentially makes the unit more microable. So this will increase the amount of, so 28%, I'm not entirely sure what it means. 28% reduction apparently on the damage point. This makes it more fluent to control. So this is overall a definite buff for the Tempest. So Protoss has a couple of weird things, right? So say you're playing a Protoss versus Terran. When you're going up against the Terran player and you're slightly ahead, you can make a transition before Terran gets up to Mass Liberator to Skytles. But if you're in an even game or you're slightly behind, usually you're better off sticking around on Blink Stalker against the late game Terran army, because transitioning to Skytles is kind of rough. Making that transition is kind of difficult. So I don't know if there's going to be a change as well to, like, for example, the Fleet Beacon cost. I wouldn't really mind that all too much. But this is going to make that transition, for example, a bit easier. And I feel like Tempest in general are one of the worst units in the game. Like, not the worst, but it's definitely up there. Or down there, rather. Yeah, so damage point is the delay between the unit stopping and the unit firing its attack. So it should be a little bit more microable. Immortal. Mineral cost decreased again from 270 to 250. That's what it used to be. And the weapon cooldown increased. Okay. So about a 10% cost reduction in minerals and about a 10% increase in the weapon's cooldown. The damage output from Immortals seemed to be too high in the Protoss versus Zerg matchup across all levels of play. While the Immortals' mineral cost is slightly decreased to compensate for the DPS nerf, this set of changes should help Zerg survive against various Protoss mid-game and late-game attacks. Right, so Protoss realized within the last half year that they don't actually need to ever play Skytles. They can just kill the ground army with their own ground army. We've seen a lot of Tempest armies in particular get absolutely torn apart. Any sort of like late game Ultralisk transitions from Zerg also are kind of shaky. So this overall is a reasonable change, I think. Make the unit slightly weaker, but also slightly cheaper. It obviously will still occupy production time, and the speed to produce is going to be identical, so we should see a similar amount of Immortals. In the late game, you're not really starving for minerals, so this is a definite nerf in the late game, but I think it's a reasonable change. Disruptor. Purification Nova radius increased from 1375 to 1.5. Purification Nova damage, however, decreased from 145, 55 versus shields, to 100. So this doesn't change anything for Protoss versus Protoss as far as damage output goes, but it does change a lot of stuff in Protoss versus Zerg, Protoss versus Terran. Specifically against Lurkers, they would be much weaker. A lot of Terran units have less than 100 HP, so it doesn't really matter. Trying to think which big, beefy units have more than 100 HP. Like, which units die right now that wouldn't die? There's probably, like, multiples. Like, say, like, 2 shots currently kill X unit. Now it's gonna take 3 shots. Yeah, siege tanks, I guess? Yeah. Siege tanks have 140 HP, I think? Or 150? Something like that. So that will now require 2. For some units, it doesn't actually matter that much. How much is the Lurker hit point? Let me look this up real quick. Lurkers have 200 health. So Lurkers will still die to 2 shots. Okay. I was thinking that might be, like, if it now takes 3 shots to kill a Lurker, that might be a bit much. But it's probably precisely 100, so it can still 2-shot a Lurker. An increase in radius also indirectly means an increase in range. Because the radius is bigger, therefore you can shoot it away from further away. So it will probably be slightly easier to fish out, say, for example, ghosts out of a Terran army. Anyways, let's see what it writes over here. So what it says. Disruptors might be very difficult to play against on the lower levels, but at the highest level, their efficiency dropped down significantly after the previous changes. This set of changes is aimed to bring back some of the Disruptor's old power, making avoiding any damage more challenging for the professional players, while at the same time making single Disruptor hits less punishing in the worst case scenario. With the new damage output, Disruptors will no longer one-shot units like the Marauder, Roach, and Ravager, while being more efficient against units like Marines, Ghosts, Banelings, and Hydras, as well as having more potential in certain PvP scenarios. So that's Protoss versus Protoss. Okay. Huh. How much HP does a Ravager have? A Ravager. Liquipedia. 120. So a Ravager has 120 health. Okay, so they will no longer die. That's actually big. The fact that Marauders also don't die in one hit is also significant. I wonder if this is too much of a nerf, to be honest, but I guess we'll see. The Mama Ship. Minerals, gas, and supply costs decreased. Or no, sorry, increased. What? We're going back up to 400, 400? Shield and HP increased as well by 100 each? So, there's been this running joke in the StarCraft world. Minus 400, minus 400. And with the most recent patch, they made the unit cheaper. And it became a bit of a dead meme. But it looks like minus 400 is back. Maximum damage is increased from 6 times 6 to 6 times 4 times... What? Maximum damage is increased from 6 damage for 6 beams to 6 damage for 4 beams times 4 maximum number of targets. So it can now target up to 4 units at the same time with each beam? Oh, look at those lasers. Okay. Oh, it's actually it's something that deals damage now. Like right now, its attack beams actually are painful. In the past, it was kind of like something that was nice, I guess. It existed. I still don't see how this is going to be too useful, because it's not a lot of damage, but... While we are happy with the previous set of changes, which brought the mothership back to PvT, and improved its efficiency in other matchups, we also appreciate the community feedback about this unit losing an important part of its identity. Yeah. This set of changes brings back full mothership power, with its widely known 400 cost, while also adding a unique ability to target up to 4 units at the same time. The single target DPS of the mothership is now reduced, but the overall damage output will be much higher. Okay, so this essentially is 4 times as much damage. No, not quite. Anyways, it's substantially more damage on the mothership's DPS, but it's still definitely not like a 1-unit army. But that is cool. I like the idea of it, yeah. Okay. So very interesting set of changes right here for the Protoss. All in all, it's relatively small. Like, say you're, I don't know, below Grandmaster. A lot of these changes are gonna not be too relevant other than the shield battery change. But I think a lot of this will be massive at the pro level. Especially the shield battery change is gonna force Protoss to relearn the early game. Simple as that. Like, early game is gonna have to be refigured out. But it looks like it's gonna be more skill-based. Specifically, the Disruptor change is gonna be really nice for ladder heroes. At the pro level, Disruptors don't hit that often. But this is gonna be a big deal, especially for a lot of people that like to play the game and aren't, you know, 500 APM deep. Most importantly, maybe though, for the real ladder heroes, the cannon rush has not been changed, okay? You can still make photon cannons in your opponent's base. You'll be okay. Terran changes. Bunker, missile turret, and sensor tower. The salvage ability has been added for the missile turret and the sensor tower? Salvage process is now cancelled upon taking damage? Whoa. You know how sometimes in games we have like late game carriers against Terran? And we have seen players like, for example, Bjorn make up to like 50 missile turrets. It's curious that you can salvage, because one of the key goals is to nerf defensive and camping playstyles. This seems like a direct buff to turtle playstyles. Maybe I'm missing something, but Sensor Tower obviously also costs resources. Expensive as heck, so... this does nerf bunkers in the early game. It makes it a little bit more punishing, which I think is fair. This will allow Terrans to be more efficient while moving from one defensive point to another, while at the same time increasing their overall investment in the early game, featuring bunkers, as the salvage is now much easier to counter. Interesting change. Very interesting. Planetary Fortress armor decrease? Okay. From 3 to 2. That is specifically a nerf against Zergling run-bys. That is gonna make them significantly worse as well in like choke points. Like we have seen them being used a little bit as of late. Like where they're not used as a base defense, but just as like a giant shooting bunker. I think this is fair. Sensor Tower, mineral and gas costs decreased from 125 to 100, 150. Oh, what? Okay. That is much cheaper. Radar change, or radar range, decreased from 27 to 22, which is a 34% area size reduction. Okay. A big range nerf. Like, that range nerf is huge. This is gonna make stopping, for example, like, I don't know, like an overseer that's trying to sneak into your main base. It's gonna be a lot harder to spot without putting units in position for that. It's the same for like Protoss move-outs, right? Like you cannot spot those nearly as easily. The main problem is not so much that you can't afford building them though. It's very much so that you can't see it coming in, right? So like you have to move your sensor tower very far forward now to get the same vision, which in some cases, like on some maps, it's just not possible. So you're gonna have to be more aware of where the opponent is located. I feel like this is overall a good change, although I find 50 gas very little. The combination of Planetary Fortress and Sensor Towers is very powerful, right, in various late game scenarios. This set of changes makes Planetary Fortresses slightly weaker against basic army units like Zerglings, Marines, and Zealots, and making Sensor Towers much less efficient in covering the whole map. Sensor Towers might now be useful in earlier stages of the game, considering their majorly reduced cost and added salvageability. That is very true. I love this part. Like a strategic or like a tactical sensor tower sounds really fun to me. I'm not sure about late game turtling, however, because like being able to salvage stuff seems like it would be a buff to turtling, but this is all relatively small, right? Like none of this is huge. Orbital Command, extra supply cooldown, now also increases the HP of supply depots to 500, immediately repairing it. This change brings additional value to the ability, allowing it to become a niche defensive tool against various offensive and counterattacks. Right, so this is a guy being all-in'd by a bunch of slow Zerglings for some reason, and it insta repairs it back up to full. I have honestly never been a fan of supply cooldown. Mostly because this is a Terran-only mechanic. Protoss and Zerg does not have a similar mechanic at all. Now, supply depots take a few seconds longer than Overlords do and than Pylons. So maybe that always made up for it, but I've always thought this was kind of a lame ability. It's fine. It's not a big deal because it's so niche at the pro level. But this, yeah, this makes the supply depot better than a shield battery. Assuming you didn't macro. This seems to be a one-base player right here on Alcyone. So Terran to be in this... This is definitely gonna shake things up. I don't love this, personally. But that's just because I'm maybe a salty Zerg player. I've always thought it was weird that Terrans can forget to macro and then drop supply depots out of the high heavens. I've always thought it was a bit weird. And then to buff it, I don't know. But anyways, it'll probably be fine, I guess. Blue Flame. Blue Flame upgrade bonus damage versus light has been increased from 5 to 9? As the Blue Flame upgrade is rarely utilized as a harassment tool, this change is added to allow Hellions with Blue Flame to two-shot workers of all races. This might also help underused mech playstyle in all matchups and promote generally more active early and mid-game for Terran. Does this mean it also increases the damage of Hellbats? Because there was one very important change in the most recent patch that no longer allowed Hellbats to one-shot Zerglings. I'm assuming this is gonna allow Hellbats to one-shot Zerglings again. I've never liked that. It makes it very... like, in fully upgraded late-game scenarios, right? I've always thought that that was very brutal for Zerg. Again, maybe I'm slightly biased. I like the idea of seeing it more as an early-game investment. But I'm not sure about late-game scenarios. Because again, if your goal is to try and reduce turtling playstyles, this makes Hellbats significantly better at stopping Brute Lords. Assuming Brute Lords are not going to be buffed as well at the same time. We haven't gotten to that yet, but... okay, Liberator. Advanced Ballistics, that's a ranged upgrade. It changed from providing +2 range in Defender mode to increasing the radius in Defender mode from 5 to 6.25. Okay. So rather than +2 range, it gets additional area increase. The circle gets bigger, which directly also increases the radius. Or the range, rather. Any radius increase is always going to increase range. But... okay, interesting. Advanced Ballistics is a little bit strong. There are some scenarios in the game right now where, say, like, you're playing... specifically for Protoss versus... or, sorry, for Terran versus Zerg, where you get the Advanced Ballistics upgrade and you can send a Liberator around the map to harass a mineral line, and Zerg cannot reach it with any ground unit. Hydras can't be in range, Queens can't reach it, Corrosive Bile can't reach it. I'm assuming this will make some of the ground units be within range to defend against that sort of thing, but... wait, Smart Servos now affects Libs? Oh! With Smart Servos, Liberator siege time is decreased from 289 to 212, and unsiege time is decreased too. Wow! That is massive against Terran, or against Protoss in particular. In PvP, we see mass Liberator all the time. This will make Liberator slightly easier to reach with Stalkers, I guess? But it's also going to allow you... so Smart Servos is the ability that allows you to transform Hellions into Hellbats, for example. This allows you to siege and unsiege it significantly faster. I'm having a hard time picturing 26% reduction speed, but it's substantial. I'm assuming you could, like, dodge Corrosive Biles as well, but this is very specific for, like, PvT. I don't see how this is countered by the Protoss changes. I guess the Tempest is slightly easier to make, but not much, and its range has been decreased too. I don't think that makes up for that. Okay, Thor. Explosive payload, so that's the splash mode. The damage is increased from 6+6 to 8+4. Currently, we mostly see Thors being used against Mutas. Mutas are one of the worst units in the game at this point. Mostly because Thors messed them up. This is gonna make Thors mess up Mutas even harder, right? Actually, no. Mutas are light. So it doesn't matter against that. Okay, what's the idea? Explosive payload splash radius has been increased from 0.5 with 100% splash to 0.5 with 100% damage. Okay. So it has radiuses? Radii? Radiuses? Explosive payload attack range is decreased from 10 to 7. Oh, massive range reduction. This is a unit that's rarely made, though, so Terrans can make do without it. Like, this is not a scenario that ever happens at the pro level, right? Like, when's the last time you've seen Thors trying to kill Void Race? That is a... That's the thing, I guess. So while being default for the unit, it's rarely utilized outside of TVZ against Mutas, and is overall much weaker than its high-impact counterpart. So high-impact is the single-target damage mode of the Thor, which is used against, like, never, but technically against, like, Broodlords, for example. This experimental set of changes is aimed to test a very different approach for explosive payloads, allowing Thors to deal damage, or to deal much more damage to all types of units in a cost of major attack range reduction. Okay. I am not sold on this at all. I'm not really concerned about this one, because the Thor is practically irrelevant in every game. But the Liberator change is a little concerning. Hellion change is a little bit concerning. Extra supply depot cooldown thing, a little bit concerning. Sensor tower situation, a little bit concerning. Salvage, I'm also a little bit concerned by. Okay, interesting. So those are the Terran changes. That's it. No changes to the Ghost? Out of all the units that got adjusted, the Ghost has no change? Are you kidding me? If I were to be making a guess, I would have assumed the only unit that would have really needed a change is the Ghost. Now, maybe the Ghost changes are cooking themselves up, right? With that mass Overseer meta that we have recently seen in Terran vs. Zerg. And I guess the Colossus will be slightly better against Bio. But the Ghost really messes with a lot of strats for the, well, Protoss mid-game and for the Zerg late-game. Like, the Ghost is good against literally everything. No changes to the Ghost? Wow. I don't see the Colossus change being that impactful. But maybe I'm overvaluing the Ghost? I'm not. Okay. The Liberator change kind of has me a little bit concerned too. Smart servos? I would have to see this in-game. But this is, I like this change. I feel like this is just a straight up buff. This isn't a unit change, like an adjustment. This makes the unit better in some scenarios and worse in others, but this is just a straight up buff. Okay, Zerg. Queen mineral cost increase from 150 to 175? Okay, I'll read them all before we pass judgment. This is an insane change. This is like increasing the cost of the Marine from 50 minerals to 60. This is a core unit. Hatchery mineral cost decrease, 25 minerals. That does not even remotely make up for the Queen change. Spinecrawler, build time decreased. Damage increased from 25 plus 5 versus armor to 30. Spore Crawler damage increase from 15 to 20. HP oh god. Okay, I'm hoping, in order to make up for this, and I may need to scroll down quickly to check. I'm hoping that Zerg has some sort of early game buff. I've considered maybe, I've mentioned this before, like maybe make the Hydralisk Den Hatchery Tech and the upgrades Lair Tech. Maybe, if the Hydra Den is available at Hatchery Tech, this could be viable. But a Queen mineral cost increase is very massive. This is a huge change. All of this is irrelevant. I don't like this. But okay, fair. This one's also practically irrelevant. Zerg playstyle against Terran and Protoss players on the higher level are mainly focused on defensive gameplay featuring Mass Queen. So I will agree that the Queen is like the best unit that Zerg has in the early game. I think it's too good. But there's a reason that it's good. There's nothing else. Like, there's literally no alternative options. The efficiency of such defensive styles with strong execution means that Terran and Protoss players might also prefer to stay passive, which doesn't lead to an active early game. This set of changes, while not majorly influencing Zerg openers with a limited number of queens, is aimed to make mass queen playstyles less affordable. The Spine and the Spore Crawler changes will help compensate? Oh, no. Spine and Spore Crawler changes do not compensate for the queen. These cost a drone in the early game. Like, the entire point of making queens early on is that they don't cost larva. So, it means that you have more larva available to spend on making workers. So, spending larva on spine crawlers and spore crawlers and having a queen that's more expensive directly nerfs Zerg early game. With a rough early game, most of the time Zerg has a terrible mid game. And if you don't have a good mid game, you basically lose. So, this is very concerning, but maybe there's more. Hydralisk, okay. Move speed on creep with muscular augments upgrade decreased from 511 to 583. New ability on the Hydralisk called Dash. So this is a creep speed remove, okay, or reduction. Dash is researched in the Hydralisk Den, requires Hive. The upgrade costs 100 minerals on 100 gas and takes a minute. Dash is an active, non-targeted ability with a 10-second cooldown. Upon its use, Hydralisk receives 60% more movement speed for 7 seconds, or 0.7 seconds. Okay, so this is a buff for late game Hydras? I mean, I don't mind that so much. I think that's kind of cool, but I'm also a little concerned that this is too good. This is basically a stim pack for Hydras that only lasts for about a second. Less than that. So I guess it's very much so a dart in and dart out. One of the best unit compositions for Zerg right now in the late game is Hydraling Bane. Mostly because all the alternatives kind of suck because of the Ghost. I'm assuming this is gonna make that more popular. Especially since the Ghost has no changes. What about Zerg versus Protoss? Most popular unit comp, I guess, would be Hydra Lurker. And this is gonna make that more powerful. The idea of this ability is to add more micromanagement potential for the key Zerg units against mass area of effect damage spells like Sonic Storm and Purification Novas. Combined with other changes like Microbial Shroud, this ability might unlock alternative ground-based Zerg playstyles against Protoss late-game armies without giving too much base power to the unit. I mean, Colossi will just smack them. Okay, Infestor. Oh, Microbial Shroud is now sticking to units, providing them with its effect for 3-6 seconds while off the Shroud. Despite being very strong on paper, Microbial Shroud is not widely used in ZVP late game, mostly due to units under the Shroud being vulnerable to area of effect damage spells. With Shroud sticking to units for 3-6 seconds outside of the actual Shroud area, Zerg players are now able to micro more freely while still enjoying the benefits of the Infestor ability. Yeah, Hydra Lurker Viper seems like a hell of a unit composition. Hydra Lurker in general, with Infestors, not a bad choice at all. So right now, your best go-to against like Sky Terran, Sky Toss is Corruptor. Like, Corruptors are just better. Because Hydras die so quickly. Microbial Shroud does not really justify it. Okay, interesting. Ultralisk. Whoa! Ultralisk, while moving, is now able to push allied units. So they actually get to the front now? Oh my god. We feel that the previous Ultralisk size, attack, and cost changes were all helpful to improve the state of the unit, but this additional change should help Zerg players across all levels to better utilize the Ultralisk strengths avoiding cases where Ultras were stuck behind other allied units. I mean, I have complained about Ultras so many times. I like, by the way, that in this example fight, they have Zerg absolutely getting dominated by Terran. Like, this is not a fight that Zerg now wins because the Ultras go to the front. Like, they're getting butchered here. But anyways. No more step Ultralisks. That's something. Yeah, there's a lot of stories on the internet about Ultralisks getting stuck in washing machines. It's a bit of a mess. This is a definite buff for Ultras. Honestly, guys, I'm looking at all of this and I'm thinking, yeah, this is cool, that is cool. The early game has me very concerned. Maybe I'm overly concerned? But this one seems really quite big. Maybe it's not that big of a deal, though. Let me think about it. So, at most, Zerg early game usually has like 8 to 9 queens. It is gonna be a few hundred minerals more expensive. And I guess you save maybe like maybe 40% or so of those minerals on the hatchery cost reduction. This also means that with a 16 hatch opener, the hatchery can be built earlier. Meaning that the queen, the very first one, will be out slightly quicker too. So that means that Reapers are easier to counter. And it also obviously means that like Queen 2 all the way up to about 5 or so are going to be out faster as well. So maybe it's fine. I'm going to have to see this in game. Broodlord. Broodlords are really kind of terrible. Broodling HP is increased from 20 to 30. Broodling weapon cooldown decreased, okay, from 5 to 4, 6, okay. Fixed the bug which prevented Broodlords from dealing full damage while shooting from maximum distance. Broodlords seem to lose too much power in head-to-head fights after the previous set of changes. The Broodling changes are now reverted, which, combined with the bug fix, should help the unit perform better in various late-game scenarios. Okay. I guess that's right. I find Broodlords to be a funky unit in the first place, mostly because if you compare them to Lurkers, they're basically worse in every way, and they overlap a lot. So, one of the issues, for example, with Broodlords is that usually whenever you attack with Broodlords, it's a one-way trip. So, very rarely do we have a fight where Broodlords are gonna go across the map and then go back home. Usually, it's a one-way trip. They don't go home. Nobody knows what happened to the Broodlords. We don't talk about that. But this is the Broodling HP. So the Broodling is the little dudes that get thrown on the ground. This makes them a little bit stronger. But at the same time, most of the time when these units are used, it's against Terran late game. And against Terran late game, we see a Blue Flame upgrade. Like, this is a substantial buff. I'm not sure exactly how the numbers line up here and how much easier or how much more difficult it will be to kill the Broodlings. So, currently, apparently, I would have to know the exact numbers. I'm not exactly sure. I don't think it makes much of a difference against late game Terran. This is nice, though. I feel like if you're gonna buff Hellbats, you're gonna have to compensate that for the Broodlords too. Like, this seems like a compensation for the Hellion Hellbat late game, which is now slightly more powerful. But this barely makes up for that Blue Flame change, doesn't it? Maybe I'm missing something, but I don't see how this is gonna suddenly make the Broodlords more straightforward to use against Terran. Obviously, this will be... Like, this is just my first impressions, right? Like, I don't really know how this is all gonna line up. But somehow, I'm thinking Terran, after dominating the last half year or so, somehow got the best set of changes. How are Terrans the one eating good? Again, just my initial impressions, but... interesting. Okay, We have some general changes too. Lowko, here's a picture of the Liberator area. That doesn't look much different. Maybe I'm crazy. Okay, anyways. Orbital Command Scanner Sweep visual now uses Team Color. Sensor Tower Radar Minimap visual now uses Team Color. Command Center Nexus Hatchery now auto rallies to mineral fields. Huh. All these years of muscle memory of right-clicking. No longer relevant. Workers waiting for refinery, extractor, or assimilator to finish do not count as idle. Okay. SCV or random delay between moving while building adjusted from 3.7 to... Okay, whatever. Added an icon to command card for Infestor, Hellion, Hellbat, Liberator showing unupgraded passive upgrades. Siege Tank and Immortal tracking change from previous patch reverted to cause unintentional retargeting. Fixed an issue where Blinding Cloud causes certain melee units to be more easily cancelled. Fixed an issue where Blinding Cloud could cause planetaries to not attack units or melee range in certain angles. Fixed an issue with issuing order on certain types of rocks in the fog. Fixed an issue with Changeling Zealot movement animation speed. And tweaked the Hydralisk move animation speed to match its actual movement speed. Art only. Okay, so this is like my very first time looking at these changes because they were just published. Let's see if these, in my mind, set out or achieve the goal that they are setting out to achieve. The first goal is to nerf defensive and camping playstyles. The only thing I'm really seeing for that is Planetary Fortress armor reduction. Maybe there's one more, but in direct contrast to that, we have missile turrets and sensor towers that are not salvageable. The sensor tower is nerfed too, but it's salvageable now, so maybe it's okay. I don't think it's gonna make defensive and camping playstyles much weaker. Maybe I'm mistaken, I'm gonna have to see it. Honestly, camping playstyles is also very dependent on the maps. And the fact that you can now drop a supply depot that is 500 HP out of the high heavens is certainly a direct buff to defensive playstyles. As far as turtling goes, it's usually just Terran that really does it in the current meta. I guess the shield battery change also is directly a nerf to defensive and camping playstyles, but it's rarely... Yeah, I guess the Queen nerf is also a direct change to that. But we don't really see Protoss and Zerg turtle in the way that Terrans turtle. Okay. The second goal is to continue reshaping Protoss tools for high-level gameplay. We believe there's still a major gap between how Protoss plays and feels on the highest level. Okay, yeah. I think this is a reasonable step in that direction. The third goal is to provide strong playstyle alternatives for various matchups. Yeah, so this is gonna make ground-based armies for Zerg against flying units from the opponent significantly better. I don't think that the Hellion and the Thor change really make a significant difference to late-game Terran and how that gets played. Hydras with Stimpak seems crazy to me. Like, that might make them too good, if I'm being honest. It's the same for, like, so continue reshaping Protoss for high-level gameplay. So the one change over here, I guess, that is also worth highlighting is the Disruptor. The Disruptor not getting insta-kills against some units like the Marauder, the Roach, the Ravager and stuff is a very big deal. So against Zerg, Protoss doesn't really rely much on Disruptors, but against Terran, they really do. So I kind of assumed, reading the Protoss changes, that there was going to be like an EMP Ghost nerf as well. But somehow the Ghost got out of this patch unchanged. That's crazy, no? The fact, like, I think if anybody in the StarCraft world would have been told to write a patch, they would probably start at the top of the page with a slight adjustment to the Ghost. I'm not saying the Ghost needs to have a massive nerf, but a slight adjustment seems in check. Okay. Let me go over them one more time. So the Nexus, shield battery overcharge removed, and we have energy overcharge instead. This is a definite nerf, but maybe it's good. It depends on how this gets played. Can you put it on autocast? Does it automatically replenish? How does this work? We have shield battery HP increase. I don't think this makes a huge difference, but fair enough. Colossus change I really do like. Tempest change I also really do like. I wonder if maybe there should be a slight buff to the cost of the Fleet Beacon. The Fleet Beacon is very expensive. Or maybe like a build time reduction or something along those lines. Immortal nerf. Reasonable. But dangerous. Dangerous. Disruptor nerf. This one is very specific. Since High Templar are no more viable in this patch than they are currently, specifically against Terran, I find this one very risky. Mothership change I quite like. It's a relatively niche unit, kind of like the Thor, so it's hard to really say how much of a difference this makes. But this makes the Mothership more of like a, you know, when you think about the Mothership fantasy, reasonable. Bunker, missile turret, sensor tower now being salvageable makes me kind of scratch my head. But this, I guess, makes early game bunkers less powerful. It's less of a piggy bank and more of a commitment, I guess. Planetary armor reduction, I think, is reasonable. Sensor tower, I'm not sure, man. The radar range, I've always thought sensor towers were one of the lamest things in the entire game. Like, they're just not fun to play against. This is gonna make it easier, I guess, to play against them, but they're also gonna be much cheaper to produce. And since they're salvageable right now, I don't know if this is really a nerf or a buff. I guess it's a slight burf or a nuff, whatever you want to call it. This one I find very lame. The more I think about the extra supplies cooldown, the less I like it. This is just weird. It's not an impactful change, and I don't think there will really be a lot of use for it. But the fact that this is now a get out of jail for free card is kind of strange. The Hellion change, since it will now once more one-shot Zerglings in the late game, I would imagine, unless I'm missing something. It will also be really strong still against the Brute Lore change with the Brute Links. I have to see how those numbers line up, but this one has me a little concerned. I like the concept of making Blue Flame Hellions once more a nice tool in the early and mid game, right? So right now we don't see a ton of mech mid game. I would like to have Battle Mech back, so maybe this makes it good again. I'm not so sure, but maybe. I'm mostly worried about the late game implications for this one. And then the same for the Liberator. I don't mind this change. I think the first change is pretty cool. So now the Advanced Ballistics is always just gonna pop it right underneath the lip. But then Smart Servos? This is one of those sneaky Terran upgrades, man. There's always a sneaky Terran buff in every single patch over the last few years. This seems like the sneaky buff for this one, this time around. To be like a quarter quicker with resieging and unsieging is massive. We'll have to see how this plays out for Protoss versus Terran in particular. Thor, like I said, not super significant. It might make it better. This one has me very concerned, just because there's nothing to really compensate for this. Technically, the Spine and the Spore Crawler, I guess, are to compensate for it, but maybe it's fine. I'm thinking mostly Zerg versus Terran, where the Queens are not just there to, like, defend against Oracles and stuff, and you don't really need them. You just need them in the right position, more or less. Like, you do need them, but it doesn't matter if you have one less. Against a lot of the Terran early game openers, you do really rely on the Queens as like an actual damage dealer and an actual tanking unit for defense. And like, say you're going up against a marine drop, a spine crawler buff is not going to do anything. A spore crawler buff is not going to do anything either. I don't know how the spore crawler damage numbers line up against oracle harassment. If the oracle dies quicker now because of a spore crawler hit, we would have to look at the exact amount of hits it can take, but this can be kind of significant too. Oracles will still be unable to attack spore crawlers. I don't think spore crawlers need a buff against oracles specifically. Maybe overall they can be slightly better, but a little bit risky. Also, don't spore crawlers deal basic damage bonus to biological? I don't see that mentioned over here, but I'm assuming that's unchanged. So Marines have 60 HP with combat shields, right? Let me just double check myself. I'm always a little bit concerned making those statements. No, they have 55. It's 55, yes. So this... Okay, yeah, so this makes the spine crawler 2-shot a marine rather than 3-shot a marine. I still don't see how it's good. Like, I'm picturing a fight between spine crawlers and a marine. It's good against 4 marines, but as soon as there's 20 marines, the spines will get melted, right? Nobody's gonna make spine crawlers to defend against marine pushes, but... I mean, all of this is relatively minor. The Hydra dash ability is kind of cool. It's gonna be fun to see, for sure. I think we're gonna see a lot of people mess around with this. It's only a very short amount of time, and it's not an attack speed improvement, but it's gonna allow you to slither away a lot more, and you can get in and out of battle much easier, which is kind of a cool idea. Microbial Shroud sticking to units, specifically good against carriers. Mass Battlecruiser technically too, but we don't really see it. There is a chance that throwing Microbial Shroud onto your Hydras and then dashing into Mass Liberator is a play. But we're gonna have to see. Ultra while moving, I mean, this is obviously good. This is something that technically doesn't matter that much at the pro level. At least it shouldn't, but we see a lot of Ultras getting stuck behind these armies anyways. This is gonna make the Ultras quite a bit better. I'm not sure how it plays against Zerglings. Roach Ultra is a weird unit composition. I don't think you want to be playing that, but this is a definite change that is for the best, I think. Brute Lord, like I said, could be an improvement, but I'd have to see it specifically against Blue Flame Hellbats. Maybe against Protoss Ground, it does make the Brute Lord a more viable option, but since the Immortal got nerfed, I think Zergs will still favor Lurkers. I don't see why you would not be favoring Lurkers. I'm trying to think what the point of the Brute Lord is, but I guess we'll see. Okay, now no mention of any new maps. A set of new maps would also be an enormous change. I really do hope we're gonna see something along those lines, but overall, I mean, I like that this is gonna shake up the game, right? I like that this is going to refine some of the changes and refine some of the units and make them a little bit more interesting. But, I mean, I'm excited to see changes, okay? At this point, we've had the same patch for such a long time that I think having new changes already shaking up the game is a really nice thing. But I'm not sure if I would have ended up with the same list if they asked me to make a set of, you know, patch changes. Now, luckily they didn't. Yeah, we'll have to see how it plays out, I guess.